The morning haze clung to the granite facade of the Metropolitan Justice Center like a shroud, muting the clamor of the awakening city as Elena Harper strode up the wide marble steps with the quiet assurance of a woman who had clawed her way through a labyrinth of skepticism and scorn, her every step a testament to the unyielding rhythm of determination that had defined her path from a modest upbringing in the bustling neighborhoods of the city's south side to the hallowed halls of prosecutorial power. At 42, she carried the weight of her briefcase not just in her left hand, a sleek, obsidian leather case etched with faint scars from countless depositions and late-night strategy sessions, but in the subtle tension of her shoulders, a reminder of every courtroom battle won against the tide of doubt and disbelief, battles where she had transformed whispers of impossibility into resounding verdicts of accountability. Her tailored navy suit, crisp despite the creeping humidity that hinted at an impending summer storm, hugged her frame with professional elegance, the fabric a silent armor woven from threads of resilience and quiet defiance, while her braided hair, pulled into a low chignon, spoke of discipline rather than vanity, a practical choice for the long hours ahead where every detail mattered, from the angle of her gaze during cross-examinations to the steady cadence of her voice delivering closing arguments that left no room for ambiguity. Inside the case lay the meticulously annotated files for the Ramirez organization case, a sprawling web of indictments against a network of individuals whose activities had cast long shadows over the community, files that Elena had pored over during sleepless nights illuminated only by the glow of her desk lamp, her pen marking the intricate threads of evidence, wiretaps capturing hushed conversations in dimly lit backrooms, witness statements etched with the raw pain of those who had seen their lives upended, and forensic reports that pieced together the puzzle of deception with the precision of a master artisan. She was early, as always, her low-heeled pumps clicking a rhythmic cadence against the cool stone, a sound that blended seamlessly with the distant hum of traffic weaving through the urban veins below and the occasional shuffle of early arrivals filtering into the morning light. Lawyers nursing steaming cups of coffee from corner vendors, their minds already racing through motions and memoranda. Defendants in rumpled attire casting furtive glances over their shoulders, haunted by the uncertainty of what the day might bring, and the ever-present security detail, uniformed figures scanning the perimeter with the vigilant eyes of guardians who knew that justice's doors swung on hinges greased by vigilance and vigilance alone. The air smelled of rain-soaked pavement mingled with the faint exhaust from idling patrol cars, a gritty perfume that Elena had come to associate with the raw pulse of truth-seeking, the unvarnished essence of a system that, for all its flaws, offered a stage where voices like hers could rise above the noise and demand reckoning. This courthouse wasn't just a building of imposing columns and echoing corridors. It was her arena, a coliseum of polished wood and stern gavels where she had risen from junior associate, fetching coffee and filing briefs in the dim corners of the office, to lead prosecutor in the district attorney's office, dismantling alibis with surgical precision and earning the quiet respect of even her fiercest adversaries, those seasoned defense attorneys who had once dismissed her as an upstart but now nodded in acknowledgement across crowded hallways, recognizing the force of her intellect and the fire of her commitment to fairness. But respect, Elena knew all too well, was a fragile currency in these corridors, lined with portraits of long-dead jurists in powdered wigs and starched collars, portraits that served as silent sentinels to a history where progress had been hard-won and often uneven, where she had felt the undercurrents of doubt before the sidelong stares in crowded elevators that lingered a beat too long, the clipped tones during high-stakes negotiations that carried an edge sharper than intended, the way male colleagues assumed she was the paralegal or the court reporter until her credentials were thrust under their noses like a challenge accepted. Yet she pressed on, fueled by the faces of those whose stories fueled her own faces, like Maria Ramirez, the courageous witness whose testimony had cracked the case wide open, her words in those affidavits carrying the weight of a community weary from years of overlooked pleas and unheeded cries for change. Today was arraignment day. The key figure in the organization would face the bench, and Elena would ensure the first domino fell with the inevitability of gravity, setting in motion a cascade that would ripple through the streets and into the lives of those who deserved safer tomorrows. Halfway up the steps, where the incline steepened and the morning light slanted golden through the haze, a shadow detached itself from the colonnade, a hulking figure in a rumpled trench coat, its fabric worn thin at the elbows from years of restless patrols, the badge pinned to his lapel glinting like a predator's tooth under the diffused sunlight that filtered through the overcast sky. Detective Harlan Voss, a veteran of the Vice Squad with a reputation as unyielding as rusted iron forged in the fires of too many unsolved cases and too few commendations, stepped into her path with the deliberate slowness of a man accustomed to commanding space and attention without a word. At 6'4" and built like a retired linebacker whose bulk had softened only slightly with age, Voss filled the air around him the way a storm cloud eclipses the sky, his presence alone enough to make the casual pedestrian veer wide, his face weathered by 2 decades on the force into a map of deep creases and shadowed hollows that spoke of nights spent chasing leads down blind alleys and days haunted by the ghosts of decisions that lingered like smoke. He had been sidelined from the organization probe months earlier, demoted after a botched operation that carried the faint scent of internal missteps and overlooked warnings, and the bitterness had festered into something deeper, a quiet resentment that colored his every interaction with the precision of a stain that refused to fade. Whispers in the precinct bullpens and dimly lit bars after shifts painted him as a relic of harder times, a man who approached his duties with a philosophy that valued results over rapport, his arrests often layered with additional notations that ensured compliance, but raised eyebrows in review boards, notations that mysteriously resolved in the haze of plea negotiations and overburdened dockets. Voss's gaze raked over Elena from head to toe, lingering on the crisp lines of her suit as if it were an ill-fitting costume donned for a masquerade, then dropping to her briefcase with a dismissive curl of his lip that twisted the corners of his mouth into something approximating a sneer, though softened by the morning's chill into mere skepticism. "Morning, ma'am," he drawled, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes shared in rain-slicked alleys and unchallenged authority that had grown comfortable in its isolation, the words landing like a gauntlet thrown in the dust of an old Western standoff, laced with the casual edge of assumption that Elena had learned to parse over years of navigating spaces where her presence alone invited scrutiny. She paused mid-stride, her expression unchanging, a mask honed from countless depositions where every twitch of muscle could be catalogued and weaponized by opposing counsel, her mind already calculating the angles, the potential for de-escalation, the protocols she could invoke, the paper trail that would follow if this veered into territory better left unmapped. "Detective," she replied evenly, her tone laced with the measured politeness of someone diffusing a live wire in a room full of dry tinder, each syllable chosen with the care of a strategist placing her pieces on a board where one wrong move could topple the game. "I am here for the Ramirez hearing. If verification is needed, my credentials are right here. In my case, Assistant District Attorney Elena Harper, badge and all." She shifted the briefcase to her other hand, fingers brushing the clasp where her prosecutor's ID nestled beside her bar admission card and a worn copy of the state penal code, its pages dog-eared from reference during midnight preparations, a routine gesture she knew by heart, identification as her first line of armor. In a world quick to question credentials that didn't match preconceived notions, the wallet never made it fully open before Voss's hand shot out, swatting it aside with a meaty palm that connected with unexpected force, sending a jolt of fire up Elena's arm as the case tumbled from her grip, spilling its contents in a cascade of revelation across the steps. Redacted affidavits fluttering like wounded birds caught in a sudden gust, encrypted USB drives skittering across the cold marble like errant marbles in a child's game gone awry, and a dog-eared photo of Maria Ramirez slipping free, her eyes in the image hollow with the quiet strength of a woman who had stared down threats to bring light to hidden corners. "Verification?" Voss echoed, his voice rising a notch as he advanced, his bulk eclipsing the light until Elena's back pressed against the cold stone railing, the metal biting through her suit like an unwelcome reminder of vulnerability. "Ma'am, the only thing needing verification is why someone like you thinks they can bypass procedure like it's optional. Seen folks try that before, stirring up more trouble than they solve." His words carried the weight of assumption, heavy with the undercurrent of experiences that had shaped his worldview into one where caution bordered on confrontation, and behind him, 2 uniforms materialized from the wings of the colonnade like echoes of his authority officer Reyes, a wiry rookie with a nervous tic that made his fingers drum against his belt, his eyes wide with the uncertainty of new boots on old ground, and Sergeant Lyle, a paunchy veteran whose loyalty to Voss bordered on instinctive, his posture relaxed but ready, phone already slipping from his pocket to capture the moment with the detached efficiency of routine protocol. They formed a loose semicircle, badges catching the slanting light like conspirator signals in a dimly lit meeting, the air thickening with the scent of impending escalation, the morning's promise souring into something sharper, more urgent. Elena's pulse quickened beneath the calm surface, a steady drumbeat that she channeled into clarity. Her breaths measured as she assessed the scene, the angle of Voss's stance suggesting readiness for resistance, the way Reyes's gaze flickered to the spilled files with a hint of hesitation, the distant murmur of the crowd thinning as early birds sensed the shift and hurried inside. She'd prosecuted cases of procedural overreach before, cross-examined officers who'd sworn identical oaths to uphold the law only to bend it under the pressure of the moment, their testimonies polished to a sheen that masked the rough edges of reality. But this felt different, more immediate, the boundary between observer and participant blurring in the haze of confrontation. "There's no bypass here, detective," she said, her voice steady as she knelt slowly to gather the scattered papers, her movements deliberate to avoid any misinterpretation, fingers trembling only slightly as they reclaimed the photo of Maria, tucking it safely back into the fray. "I'm expected in court, let's resolve this quickly, for everyone's sake." But Voss's hand clamped down on her wrist before she could rise fully, his grip firm and unyielding, pulling her upright with a force that sent a fresh wave of discomfort radiating through her shoulder, his face inches from hers now, breath carrying the faint staleness of black coffee and unresolved frustration. "Resolve? Ma'am, resolution starts with compliance hands where I can see 'em. No more games with fancy papers." The command hung in the air, laced with the authority of years spent enforcing lines drawn in chalk that sometimes blurred under scrutiny, and Reyes fumbled for his cuffs, the metal clicking open with a sound like the cocking of a lock, while Lyle circled wider, his phone held steady, narrating the scene in low tones for the record. Subject non-compliant, potential security risk, proceeding with restraint for officer safety. Elena's mind raced through the mental checklist she'd built over years of training and trial runs: de-escalate with facts, document every exchange, invoke rights without provocation, but the physicality of it all pressed in. Voss's knee nudging her thigh to steady his balance as he twisted her arm behind her back, the pressure building until the world tilted, her vision spotting at the edges from the strain. Pain bloomed where his fingers dug in, bruising flesh through the thin silk of her blouse, but she bit back any sound, channeling the discomfort into fuel, cataloging every detail with the precision of a prosecutor building her case. The exact angle of the hold, likely to leave marks that would photograph as evidence of unnecessary force, the timestamp on Lyle's device, syncing with the courthouse clocks ticking indifferently onward. The way Reyes averted his eyes, a flicker of discomfort betraying his role in the unfolding script. "This is a mistake," she managed, her voice even through the grit of teeth. "But we'll sort it in Chambers' release, and I'll explain." Voss's response was a low grunt, his free hand gesturing for backup as they maneuvered her toward the side entrance. The steps that had borne her ascent now witnesses to this unexpected descent, the spilled files trampled underfoot by hurried feet, affidavits crumpling like fallen leaves in autumn's indifferent sweep. From the shadows of the grand entrance, a small crowd had gathered, clerks peering from half-open doorways with hands over mouths, a janitor frozen mid-mop with his bucket tipping forgotten, a young intern clutching her satchel like a shield, but no one crossed the invisible line. The collective hesitation, a microcosm of the system's own paralysis in moments of ambiguity, where intervention risked entanglement in the web of procedure and consequence. The steps, once a thoroughfare of measured justice and hurried consultations, had become a stage for an unplanned drama, the air charged with the electric hum of what-ifs and repercussions yet to unfold. Elena's thoughts, sharp amid the haze, flickered to the bronze plaque above the massive doors, its inscription "Equal Justice Under Law" gleaming mockingly in the light. The words a vow that felt distant in this moment, but close in her resolve, coiling in her gut like a serpent ready to strike, transforming irony into impetus. These men, in their adherence to protocol, twisted by haste, had just handed her the raw material for a narrative far grander than the Ramirez case, a story of unchecked assumptions meeting the unyielding wall of truth, ammunition forged from the very friction of their encounter. Inside, the holding area awaited like an antechamber to purgatory, its walls painted in institutional beige that absorbed light and hope alike, the air reeking of bleach sharp enough to sting the eyes and the underlying tang of despair that seeped from countless similar mornings. They shoved Elena onto a scarred wooden bench, the surface worn smooth by generations of occupants, her wrists secured to a metal ring bolted unyieldingly to the wall with cuffs that chafed against her skin, cold and impersonal as the process that had led her here. Voss loomed in the doorway, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve, his chest rising and falling with the exertion of righteousness self-bestowed, his grin emerging slow and satisfied, teeth flashing in the harsh fluorescent glare like a victory claimed in advance. Sit tight now, booking's gonna sort your story, but from where I'm standing, it's trespass with a side of disruption, maybe even intent to interfere. Folks like you always got an angle, but angles don't fly here. His words carried the weight of finality, the assumption woven through them a threadbare cloak over the vulnerability of his own position, as if naming the narrative made it immutable. Reyes hovered awkwardly in the threshold, pocketing his phone with fingers that betrayed a tremor, his voice pitching low as he glanced at the scattered remnants of Elena's case still clutched in Lyle's hand. Sarge, those papers looks like official DA stuff, seals and all. This feels off, like maybe we jumped the gun. Voss rounded on him with the speed of a coiled spring, his finger jabbing the air like a bayonet aimed at doubt, his voice dropping to a hiss that echoed off the cinder block walls. Off? Kid, you see what fits the pattern's suspicious approach. Evasive answers. Papers that scream setup. She's connected to the case we're watching. We just kept the wrong element from slipping through. Trust the gut that kept us alive this long. The reassurance rang hollow even to his own ears, but Reyes nodded, the nod of a novice anchoring to the mast of experience, loyalty trumping the nagging whisper of misstep, while Lyle chuckled softly, scrolling through his footage with the casual detachment of one who had captured 100 such scenes, each one a brick in the wall of his career's facade. Got the whole thing clean, her pulling away, you holding steady like protocol demands. Captain will eat this up as proactive. Elena remained silent on the bench, her breath steady and controlled despite the throb radiating from her shoulder and the metallic taste of resolve on her tongue, her eyes tracing the cracks in the opposite wall as if mapping escape routes not physical but procedural, her mind a whirlwind of legal precedents and strategic pivots. She'd defended against fabricators like this in trial after trial, watched juries absorb their tales with the credulity of those who trusted the uniform as shorthand for truth, but knowledge was her unassailable ally. Every exchange recorded in digital permanence, every pressure point a potential exhibit in the gallery of accountability. From the depths of her jacket pocket, before the full search had commenced, she'd managed a covert press of her phone's emergency beacon, a silent SOS pinging to her second chair, and the DA's tech team incident at steps. Preserve feeds. Harper. The machinery of response humming to life in the ether, gears turning with the inevitability of dawn following dusk. As Voss sauntered out, his boots echoing down the linoleum corridor like the tolling of a distant bell, whistling a tuneless melody that grated against the quiet, Elena leaned back against the unyielding wall, the chain of her cuffs rattling softly in counterpoint to her thoughts, a metallic underscore to the symphony of strategy unfolding. The swelling on her cheek began to rise, a purple bloom against her skin that would fade but not before serving its purpose as a visual testament, but her eyes burned with the focused fire of a woman who had turned unfavorable odds into cornerstones of triumph, who had stood in courtrooms where the air hung heavy with prejudice's residue and emerged not just victorious but transformative. This wasn't the derailment of her ascent. It was the forge in which her resolve would be tempered sharper. The Ramirez case proceeding not in spite of this detour but enhanced by its undercurrent of personal stakes, a vendetta woven from the very fabric of misunderstanding that these officers had unraveled in their haste. Word of the incident spread through the precinct like smoke seeping under a sealed door, tendrils curling into conversations over lukewarm coffee in the break room and terse exchanges in the evidence lockers, Voss already regaling his shift with an embellished recounting in the bullpen, his voice booming off the cluttered desks piled high with case folders and half-eaten donuts. Spotted this one slinking up the steps, briefcase full of who knows what, acting like she owned the place. Had to shut it down quick. Papers everywhere, but nothing that checks out clean. Laughter rippled through the group, mugs clinking in mock toasts to vigilance, heads nodding in the camaraderie of shared narratives that reinforced the bonds of the badge. But beneath the surface, a few glances exchanged unease, the rookies like Reyes chewing their lips as they replayed the footage in their minds, wondering at the line between precaution and overreach. Meanwhile, 2 floors above in the DA's office, a warren of glass-partitioned cubicles buzzing with the hum of printers and the click of keyboards under the relentless march of deadlines. Elena's team mobilized with the efficiency of a well-oiled engine, paralegals cross-referencing security feeds pulled from central servers, their screens flickering with time-stamped frames that captured the exchange in unflinching detail. Investigators delving into Voss's personnel file, unearthing a trail of prior complaints dismissed as administrative oversights, 2 quiet settlements that had padded departmental budgets without fanfare, patterns emerging like ink blots in a Rorschach test of systemic blind spots. The air in the office crackled with the prelude to a gathering storm, phones lighting up with urgent calls to ethics hotlines and federal liaisons. Elena's second chair, Marcus Hale, pacing the carpet with a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, urgent murmur, coordinating delays for the Ramirez docket while his free hand sketched timelines on a whiteboard scarred from erasures past. By midday, Elena found herself in the arraignment courtroom, listed on the docket as unknown female subject #47, her suit bearing the faint tears at the seams from the scuffle, a thin crust of dried tension on her lip where she'd bitten back words better saved for testimony. The room a cavern of dark wood paneling and high ceilings that amplified every cough and shuffle into echoes of judgment. The judge, a harried man named Harlan with wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose and a stack of files teetering before him like a Jenga tower of bureaucracy, banged his gavel with practiced authority, the sound reverberating like a starter pistol. Charges read: criminal trespass, interference with official duties, obstruction of justice. How does the subject plead? Voss took the stand then, his oath swallowed like a routine formality, his testimony unfolding with the practiced ease of a man who had recited variations of this script 100 times, spinning a yarn of suspicion and escalation. Approached the entrance displaying evasive behavior. Your Honor refused to present clear ID, scattered materials consistent with unauthorized access. Had to apply minimal restraint to maintain order. She pulled away aggressively, endangering the perimeter. His words painted a picture of necessity, each detail burnished to deflect scrutiny, but Elena watched from the defense table, unchained now but flanked by a public defender who stammered through half-formed objections, her mind dissecting the narrative layer by layer, the omitted mention of her extended ID, the exaggeration of her movements that the video would soon contradict with cold impartiality, the subtle shift in his posture as he avoided her gaze, a telltale sign of the fiction's fragile foundation. As Voss stepped down from the box, his eyes meeting hers with a wink that carried the smug assurance of a conqueror surveying his domain, Elena felt the pivot in the air, the subtle shift from chaos to convergence, the moment when the scales of justice, though tilted, began their inexorable swing back toward balance. The public defender leaned in close, his cologne cloying in the confined space, whispering with the earnestness of one offering a lifeline. We can negotiate this down to a misdemeanor. Maybe community service avoid the full weight. Elena's smile emerged slow and sharp as a blade unsheathed, her response a murmur laced with certainty. No negotiations. Let the record play out fully. She knew the Ramirez hearing loomed in the adjacent chamber, her absence a gaping void in the proceedings that her team was valiantly filling with motions and continuances. But voids could be bridges, opportunities disguised as setbacks, ladders forged from the rungs of adversity. As the judge called a recess for the midday meal, the courtroom emptying in a rustle of papers and murmured consultations, Elena slipped a folded note to a passing clerk, her handwriting precise even in haste. Preserve all entrance feeds, 8:45 to 9:15. Urgent Harper. The clerk's eyes widened in fleeting recognition, a spark of understanding igniting as she nodded and vanished into the administrative maze, the gears of institutional memory grinding into motion. Afternoon brought a swell of activity, Voss's colleagues filtering into the gallery pews with the casual solidarity of those bound by shared routines, their postures relaxed but eyes alert, whispers circulating like contraband about the feisty one from the steps and how the system always sorted itself in the end. Elena's team operated as ghosts in the wings, feeding anonymous tips to the bench through back channels and pulling strings in the evidence room where digital archives waited like buried treasure, the air in the courthouse thickening with the static charge of impending revelation, a tension that hummed beneath the surface like the low vibration of a tuning fork struck in silence. Voss, sensing none of the undercurrents swirling toward him, paused in the hallway to text his wife from a cracked screen. Routine dust up, wrapped clean. Home for steak your special. Oblivious to the blade sharpening mere feet away in the DA's war room, where screens glowed with enhanced footage and timelines branched like veins carrying the lifeblood of accountability, Elena sat in quiet preparation, her fingers tracing the edge of a legal pad, jotting notes not of defense but of offense, the precedents that would frame excessive action as violation, the witnesses whose voices would amplify her own, the reforms that this moment demanded beyond mere reprimand. The bruise on her cheek deepened to a shadowed violet, a mark that would heal but linger in photographs and memories, but in its place grew a clarity sharper than pain, a vision of justice not as abstract ideal but as tangible force, ready to reshape the narrative from one of interruption to one of imperative change. As the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors that danced like specters of consequences yet to come, Elena rose from her seat, the public defender trailing with questions unanswered, her steps carrying her not toward exit but toward the heart of the fray, where the Ramirez chamber waited, and with it the convergence of paths that would test the mettle of everyone involved, the officers bound by duty's double edge, the witnesses holding breath for vindication, and herself, the architect of tomorrow's verdict, her briefcase reclaimed and refilled, heavier now with the weight of purpose, unyielding. The courthouse, in all its grandeur and grit, stood as witness to this unfolding, its stones holding the echoes of countless such mornings. But this one promised to resonate longer, a chord struck that would vibrate through dockets and departments, calling forth a harmony of equity from the discord of assumption. Elena Harper at its center, not as victim of circumstance but as conductor of the symphony that followed, her resolve the baton guiding each note toward resolution. The courtroom for the Ramirez arraignment thrummed with the restrained chaos of a system in perpetual motion, its vaulted ceilings stained by decades of flickering fluorescent lights that cast long, wavering shadows across the polished oak benches where spectators shifted uneasily. A diverse tapestry of anxious family members clutching worn rosaries and faded photographs as talismans against uncertainty. Sharp-eyed reporters whose fingers danced across laptop keyboards capturing every murmur and gesture for tomorrow's headlines, and undercover investigators blending into the wooden pews like unassuming threads in a woven fabric, their notebooks concealed but ever present, eyes scanning the room for tells that might unravel the fragile weave of testimony to come. The air hung thick with the mingled scents of polished wood waxed to a high sheen, the faint mustiness of aged legal tomes stacked in nearby alcoves, and the underlying sharpness of ink from freshly printed indictments that rustled like autumn leaves in the hands of counsel poring over last-minute amendments, a sensory prelude to the verbal sparring that defined these chambers as much as the stern portraits of past jurists gazing down from paneled walls, their painted eyes seeming to weigh each proceeding with the impartiality of history itself. Elena Harper's absence had thrown the proceedings into a subtle disarray, a ripple effect that manifested in the hesitant cadence of her second chair, Marcus Hale, a wiry litigator in his mid-30s with a penchant for dramatic pauses that bordered on theatrical flair, his salt and pepper hair tousled from running fingers through it in moments of strategic contemplation as he stood at the prosecutor's table, stalling the docket with a series of procedural nitpicks delivered in his resonant baritone, each objection a carefully timed delay that bought precious seconds while his gaze darted repeatedly to the heavy oak side door, willing it to swing open and deliver the missing piece of their prosecutorial puzzle. Hale's voice carried across the room with the measured gravity of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Your Honor, if I may, the state's motion to introduce Supplemental Exhibit B12 requires clarification on chain of custody. Witness availability remains in flux pending verification from the lab." His words weaving a net of technicality that ensnared the momentum, drawing a sigh from the defense counsel, a silver-tongued veteran named Carla Ruiz, who leaned back in her chair with the languid confidence of one who had navigated these waters for decades, her manicured nails tapping a rhythmic counterpoint against her leather folio as she countered with a wry smile. "Counsel is fishing for adjournments. Judge, let's not let procedure eclipse progress." The judge, Rita Klein, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s with silver streaks threading through her precise bob haircut and a reputation for rulings as swift and unyielding as a winter gale, peered over the rim of her half-moon glasses, her expression a blend of impatience and practiced neutrality, the lines around her mouth deepening as she adjusted the stack of files before her, each one a testament to the relentless churn of justice's wheel. Mr. Hale, the state's ready to proceed, I presume? Or shall we adjourn for the fourth time this week? Your office's urgent matters are testing even my considerable patience. Klein's tone brooked no further evasion, her gavel hovering like a suspended sentence. But Hale held his ground, clearing his throat with a subtle nod to the bailiff who lingered near the door, his broad frame a silent sentinel, attuned to the unspoken cues that governed the room's undercurrents. Harlan Voss, fresh from the adrenaline-fueled glow of his earlier resolution in the adjacent arraignment chamber, had been reassigned to courtroom security for the afternoon shift, a posting that allowed him to perch against the far wall like a feudal overseer surveying his domain. His arms crossed over the broad expanse of his chest, the fabric of his trench coat straining slightly at the seams as he scanned the gallery with the proprietary gleam of a man who believed he had just etched another unassailable mark on the ledger of his career, his mind replaying the morning sequence in triumphant loops, the scattered papers and compliant shuffle, a validation of instincts honed over years of navigating the gray zones between precaution and presumption. The Ramirez defendant, Javier Morales, a compact man in his 40s with tattoos snaking up his neck like intricate vines claiming territory, sat shackled at the defense table, his posture erect but his dark eyes flickering with the calculated wariness of one who had danced this dance before, his lawyer Ruiz whispering feverishly into his ear, her gestures animated as she outlined contingencies, the air between them charged with the electric tension of alliances forged in shadowed negotiations far from these public lights. Voss's vantage point afforded him a clear view of the proceedings, his thoughts drifting to the satisfaction of containment, how the woman from the steps fit neatly into the archetype of disruptors he had encountered time and again, her briefcase a prop in a larger play of evasion that his intervention had curtailed, oblivious to the digital breadcrumbs he had scattered in his wake, the body cam footage archived in servers humming quietly in the basement, waiting for the right query to illuminate its truths. But in the Holden corridor just beyond the chamber's heavy doors, Elena moved with the purposeful grace of a shadow reclaiming form, her torn suit jacket shrugged off and replaced with a spare blazer sourced from a sympathetic clerk's locker, the fabric a size too large but serviceable, its neutral gray a canvas for the resolve etching lines across her features. The cut above her eye had been swabbed clean with antiseptic wipes in a makeshift first aid nook, the swelling taped discreetly beneath a layer of concealer that masked but did not erase the morning's imprint, a subtle reminder that vulnerability could coexist with velocity. Her fire undimmed as she reviewed preliminary feeds on her tablet, the screen's glow casting ethereal highlights on her determined expression, timestamps aligning like stars in a constellation of evidence that pointed inexorably toward vindication. She paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply the familiar must of Justice's theater, the faint ozone of overheated projectors, the whisper of turning pages from anxious spectators, the undercurrent of polished brass from the railings that separated the players from the audience, a sensory ritual that grounded her, reminding her that this chamber had been her proving ground time and again, where she had elicited confessions from the unyielding, unraveled conspiracies thread by legal thread, and forged verdicts that echoed beyond these walls into policy shifts and community breaths of relief, now poised to host not just the Ramirez unfolding but her own reemergence, a phoenix scripted in legalese and resolve. A bailiff named Tomas, a grizzled veteran with a salt-flecked mustache and the steady gait of one who had ushered thousands through these portals, caught her eye from his post and offered a subtle nod, a silent relay of solidarity born from shared late-night coffees during marathon trials and quiet conversations about the system's creaks and groans. His gesture an affirmation that the machinery, for all its inertia, could turn on behalf of those who knew its levers. All rise, Tomas intoned as Judge Klein re-entered from chambers, the room complying in a rustle of fabric and creaking benches. But Elena slipped into the prosecutor's bench amid the shuffle, her movements fluid and unannounced, positioning herself beside Hale, who spotted her first. Relief flooding his features like sunlight breaking clouds, his whispered, "You're here, thank God," carrying the weight of hours spent holding the line alone, sliding her files across the table with a conspiratorial efficiency that spoke volumes of their seasoned partnership. Heads turned incrementally, Ruiz's frown deepening into suspicion as she clocked the newcomer, reporters perking up with the predatory instinct of those who sensed a story's pivot, their pens pausing mid-stroke to reassess the dynamics at play. Voss, from his wall-side perch, did a double-take that rippled through his frame, his smirk faltering into a crease of confusion as recognition dawned slow and unwelcome. The woman he had detained hours earlier now ensconced at the table of power, as if the morning's events had been a mere intermission in her script, his mind scrambling to reconcile the image with the narrative he had constructed, whispering urgently to Sergeant Lyle, who lingered nearby, his chuckle emerging nervous and threaded with doubt. Nah, can't be, must be a relative or stand-in, right? The one we processed was all roughed up. Klein's gavel cracked once more, settling the room into expectant hush, her voice cutting through like a well-honed blade. Miss Harper, good of you to join us at last. The state's motion to proceed? Elena rose then, her posture impeccable, voice emerging as a clarion call that sliced the residual din with effortless authority. Your Honor, lead counsel present and prepared before we arraign. I request a sealed sidebar to address evidence of exigent circumstances directly impacting case integrity and witness safety, her diction a velvet sheath over steel, each phrase landing with the precision of a chess master advancing her queen, the legal terminology flowing from her lips like a river carving canyon, drawing an arched brow from Klein who, despite her impatience, recognized the gravity in the request. Exigent in a cartel matter implied layers beyond the routine, potential tampering or threats that could cascade through the docket like dominoes toppled by a careless breath. Klein nodded curtly, her ruling a murmur that cleared the room with mechanical efficiency, spectators filing out in orderly confusion while counsel and the bench retreated to the shadowed alcove off the main floor, its walls lined with dusty law volumes that absorbed whispers like secrets confided to old friends, the air cooler here, laced with the faint scent of aged paper and resolved disputes. In that intimate space, Elena laid bare the morning's fracture without preamble, her tablet awakening to life under her touch, the screen blooming with footage from the entrance cams, Voss's form materializing like a specter, his hand connecting with her wrist in stark pixelated clarity, audio threading through the speakers in tinny fidelity, his gruff directives clashing against her calm entreaties, the sequence unfolding in relentless honesty that painted not resistance but restraint on her part. The spilled files a visual indictment of overzealous intervention. Klein's face hardened incrementally, the lines around her eyes etching deeper as she absorbed the visuals, her voice dropping to a rare register of personal concern, a fracture in the iron facade she wore like judicial regalia. This is you, Elena, in my courthouse under my watch? Why lead with silence instead of sounding the alarm? The question hung weighted with the shared history of their profession, Klein having mentored younger prosecutors through tempests of doubt, but Elena met it with steady candor, her response measured to bridge empathy and exigency. Protocol demanded composure. Your Honor, escalation could compromise the feeds, but it ties directly to Ramirez security. The materials scattered were sealed affidavits, potential leverage if accessed improperly, and the officers involved overlap with prior case peripheries, raising contamination risks for our witnesses. Her eyes held Klein's, conveying the unspoken calculus, the balance between personal slight and systemic safeguard, the way this incident amplified vulnerabilities in the chain that protected informants like Maria from retaliation's long reach. Klein processed it in silence, her fingers drumming a staccato against the alcove's rail, then issued her directive with clipped finality. Sidebar motion for mistrial on integrity grounds granted. Effective immediately. Ramirez holds until safeguards confirm. But this footage? It escalates federal. I'll loop in the marshals for preservation and pursuit. No stone unturned. Elena, not in my house. The words carried the ring of alliance forged in mutual respect. A bridge extended across the divide of robes and ranks. Returning to open court felt like re-entering a stage mid-scene, the gallery reassembling with renewed curiosity as Klein resumed her seat, her declaration landing like a thunderclap tempered by procedure. Arraignment postponed pending integrity review, parties notified. Counsel excused. Court stands adjourned until safeguards affirm. Javier's attorney crowed a premature note of triumph, her smile flashing victory's gleam, while Voss shifted on his feet, the unease gnawing deeper now, a worm of doubt burrowing through the armor of his assumptions as the room emptied in waves, the echo of footsteps receding like a tide pulling back to reveal hidden contours. Elena lingered at the table, gathering her files with deliberate calm, each paper a reclaimed fragment of her narrative, her fingers tracing edges worn from handling as if reaffirming their solidity. When Voss approached under the guise of procedural courtesy, his steps measured but his bulk betraying a subtle hesitation, feigning concern with a gravelly timbre that strained against sincerity. Heard about that dust-up earlier, must have been a paperwork mix-up, wires crossed in the rush. No hard feelings, right? All in a day's protocol. Elena's gaze lifted to meet his, cool as glacial melt meeting sun-warmed stone, her response laced with ambiguity that danced on the edge of revelation. Mix-up? Detective. That's a generous term for crossed lines. Perhaps we'll clarify them in due course, when all angles align. She let the words linger, watching the color ebb from his jowls, the faint sheen of perspiration gathering at his temples as he blustered a retort about split-second necessities in high-stakes environments. But she turned away with a nod to Hale, leaving Voss adrift in the swell of his own unraveling certainties, the wink from earlier now, a phantom gesture haunting his periphery. The afternoon devolved into a frenzy of orchestrated shadows across the courthouse's labyrinthine corridors, Voss retreating to the locker room's dim confines, where lockers clanged like distant judgments and the air carried the faint tang of liniment and leather polish, Reyes cornering him near the sinks with a voice pitched low and edged with urgency, his youthful frame taut with the conflict of allegiance and awakening conscience. Sarge. That was her, the lead on Ramirez. Face matches the board photos dead on. We can't just wave this off. The files were legit. Seals unbroken. What if it's bigger than a stop gone sideways? Voss waved it away with a meaty hand, his dismissal a reflex born of survival's playbook, but the sweat beading anew on his brow betrayed the fracture. Coincidence layered on protocol. Kid, she played it smooth. Must have called in markers quick. We held the line. That's what counts. The rest sorts in reports. Yet, as he stripped off his coat, folding it with unnecessary precision, sleep evaded him that night. In the quiet of his modest row house, his dreams replaying the morning not as a clean takedown but as the initial fissure in a facade cracking under pressure, his wife's concerned queries met with grunts and deflections over cooling plates of takeout, the television's murmur a futile lullaby against the gnaw of what-ifs. Elena's war room, meanwhile, pulsed with vitality in the DA's annex, a honeycomb of partitioned spaces, alive with the soft glow of desk lamps, casting pools of warm light on timelines sketched in dry erase ink and suspect matrices clustered like constellations on corkboards, Hale poring over forensic enhancements at a corner station, his screen dissecting the footage frame by frame to isolate audio anomalies and metadata ghosts, while a junior analyst cross-referenced Voss's arrest logs against demographic spikes, patterns emerging in spreadsheets that screamed of selective scrutiny without uttering a word. Elena orchestrated from the central table, her bruised knuckles now wrapped in discreet bandages tapping a rhythmic Morse code against the scarred oak surface as she directed the flow, pulled the overlap with Ramirez peripherals, any shared informants, leaked cords. Layer in IA priors, build the connective tissue from isolated to institutional. Her voice a steady anchor amid the bustle, drawing nods from the team whose loyalty she had earned, not through bluster but through shared victories in the trenches of overlooked cases and uphill battles for resources. By evening's descent, when the sun dipped low and painted the office windows in hues of amber and indigo, leaks began to sprout like tentative buds in precinct back channels, anonymous posts on internal forums decrying overzealous oversight, hamstringing frontline efforts, threads laced with veiled defenses of procedure's sanctity. But Elena's network of allies, a web of civil rights litigators with Rolodexes thick as case law, and federal contacts whose emails arrived encrypted and urgent countered with precision strikes, whispers of impending audits circulating like fog through the ranks, planting seeds of introspection where complacency had taken root. Voss, ensconced in his split-level home with its walls lined by faded commendation plaques gathering dust on mantel shelves, nursed a solitary beer in the dim kitchen light, the bottle's condensation tracing rivulets down glass like tears unshed, his phone remaining stubbornly silent save for Lyle's sporadic texts flickering across the screen. Reporters circling the step story, Stonewall, played the routine card, but the quiet amplified the internal echo, a hollow chamber where doubt echoed louder than directives, his mind wandering to the faces in those old photos, Partners long retired who had preached the gospel of gut over guideline, now their wisdom feeling like a weight rather than wings. Dawn of the following day broke with Voss summoned to the captain's office, a sterile cube dominated by a desk cluttered with commendations and a window overlooking the precinct yard where patrol cars idled like patient beasts, and the Captain Greer, a pragmatic figure with a paunch softened by desk years and eyes sharp as case files sliding a manila folder across the blotter with the reluctance of one delivering unwelcome mail. Walk me through the Harper stop. Harlan top to bottom, no gloss. Voss spun his account with the familiarity of rehearsal, emphasizing evasion and escalation. But Greer's gaze remained leaden, unyielding as he flipped pages to reveal stills pulled from archived cams, timestamps glaring like accusatory beacons. Cams paint a different canvas. Detective feds are inbound on a civil integrity angle. This isn't a slap on the wrist territory. The words landed with the finality of a door closing, Voss's world tilting on its axis, the folder's contents a mosaic of his own lens-turned mirror, reflecting back not heroism but haste, his protests dissolving into mutters as Greer leaned forward, voice dropping to the timbre of reluctant counsel. Get ahead of it, full disclosure to IA, might soften the landing. Department's got your back, but not if you drag feet. Desperation, that great leveler, birthed uneasy alliances in the hours that followed. Voss convening Reyes and Lyle in a nondescript diner tucked off the interstate's roar, its vinyl booths sticky with the residue of countless hurried meals and the air heavy with the sizzle of grease from the flat top, coffee steaming in chipped mugs as Voss hissed across the scarred Formica. We hold the line scripts as she initiated the push, files as cover for probing weak spots in the cartel web. No cracks, no flood. Reyes balked visibly, his fork pausing mid-air over a plate of cooling eggs, youthful idealism fracturing under the strain. But it's etched in the ether, Sarge tapes don't lie, and if they dig, badges melt. Maybe we pivot, own the overstep for mitigation. Lyle, the opportunist with a gambler's glint ever in his eye, nodded with feigned gravity, his fingers drumming the table's edge, or we reframe claims she baited for headlines, turn the spotlight on prosecutorial gamesmanship. I've seen it stick in reviews. They're packed sealed over refills of bitter brew, but Fisher's spiderwebbed beneath Reyes's gaze sliding to the window where traffic blurred by indifferent, Lyle's fidgeting betraying the calculus of self-preservation while back at the courthouse's nerve center, Elena prepped her counter-offensive in the evidence vault's cool embrace, a cavernous space lined with steel shelves groaning under the weight of boxed histories, her team subpoenaing access logs and deposing peripheral witnesses in hushed side rooms. The Ramirez matter simmering on ice, but its latent heat fueling her forge, every deferred justice, a ledger entry accruing toward comprehensive redress. Midweek brought the reconvened hearing, the gallery swollen with press badges glinting like medals under the lights, Elena entering flanked by federal liaisons in crisp suits that whispered of broader jurisdictions, her presence electric as she took the podium. Voss called as a security consultant to the stand, his voice striving for steadiness but cracking at the edges, eyes darting like cornered prey as he intoned, "Standard perimeter check escalated on non-compliance cues. De-escalation attempted per training." Elena's cross-examination unfolded like a surgeon's incision, precise and probing. Standard to engage physically pre-verification, detective? Or selective when compliance doesn't align with expectations? The room inhaled sharply, a collective gasp threading through the benches. Voss sputtered through deflections, but the seed of skepticism took root, blooming in sidelong glances from the panel and hurried notes from scribes. In the post-session hush of the evidence vault, Elena reviewed the emergent mosaic timestamp syncing Voss's successes with escalation patterns, demographic threads weaving a tapestry of disparity that demanded not just censure but restructuring her reflection in a darkened monitor showing the bruise faded to a whisper of yellow, a badge evolving from battle scar to emblem of endurance. Hale joining her with fresh depositions in hand, his voice hushed with anticipation. Reyes's cracking immunity whispers in his ear, conspiracy threads tightening. Elena nodded, the board clearing like fog lifting at sea, but triumph carried a tempered edge, the ash of awareness that this skirmish heralded a siege on complacency's citadel, reforms not as afterthought but architecture for equity's edifice. As twilight cloaked the city in velvet folds, Voss paced the confines of his kitchen, shadows lengthening across linoleum like fingers of reckoning, a sharp knock shattering the fragile peace federal agents in measured cadence, warrants crisp as new bills. Harlan Voss, detained for questioning on obstruction and procedural interference. You have the right to remain. Cuffs clicked with echoing symmetry to the morning's irony, the door closing on his protests as Elena, in her high-rise office overlooking the twinkling grid of streets below, watched the feed on a secure line, her fingers steepled in contemplation, the gavel of her intent not yet fallen but resonant in the air, poised for the crescendo where Chambers' echoes resolved into enduring harmony, one prejudiced pillar yielding to the unyielding advance of accountability's tide. The federal courthouse loomed on the city's outskirts like a crystalline bastion forged from the aspirations of reform, its expansive glass facade mirroring the fractured skyline in a mosaic of refracted light that hinted at the transparency promised but often deferred within its halls, a structure designed not for spectacle but for the quiet adjudication of truths too intricate for soundbites, where the hum of deliberation replaced the clamor of arraignments and the air carried the subtle fragrance of fresh printouts and the faint, metallic tang of servers whirring in climate-controlled depths, processing terabytes of data that could reshape careers and communities with the click of a verdict. Inside the designated hearing room for high-profile integrity inquiries, the atmosphere pulsed with a disciplined intensity far removed from the theatrical flourishes of criminal dockets, its walls unadorned, save for the discreet emblem of federal oversight etched in frosted panels. The space configured more like a conference suite than a courtroom, with modular tables arranged in a semicircle around a central dais where the panel convened 3 seasoned overseers from the Oversight Commission, their notebooks open like shields against ambiguity, a representative from the Department of Justice, her briefcase a repository of precedents that spanned decades of civil safeguards, and a rotating magistrate whose gavel, when it fell, echoed not with finality but with the prelude to further review. The room's acoustics tuned to amplify clarity over confrontation, spotlights adjustable to illuminate exhibits without the glare of judgment. Elena Harper positioned herself at the lectern with the poised elegance of a cartographer unveiling a newly charted territory, her silhouette etched sharply against the projected timeline unfurling across the rear screen, a dynamic digital autopsy of departmental practices spanning half a decade, nodes pulsing in crimson and azure to denote Voss's interventions like inflamed pathways in a body politic strained by inconsistencies, the visualization, a symphony of data points where arrest frequencies intersected with demographic distributions, revealing contours of disparity that no amount of procedural veneer could obscure, her attire a charcoal-sheathed dress that evoked the solemnity of memorials rather than confrontations, its simple lines allowing the cascade of her hair, released from its earlier constraints to fall in soft waves, to frame a face where the faint scar above her eye served as a silver filigree, a testament to endurance woven into her narrative without apology. Flanking her at the table formed a constellation of allies. Marcus Hale, with his meticulously organized stacks of sworn depositions bound in crisp folders, each one a layered narrative of overlooked patterns. A forensic data specialist, her laptop humming softly as it rendered real-time analytics from anonymized logs, and Maria Ramirez, the linchpin witness whose quiet presence in a modest cardigan and slacks radiated the unassuming strength of one who had chosen candor over concealment, her hands folded in her lap as a subtle anchor against the room's undercurrents, her eyes meeting Elena's in silent affirmation of the shared journey from shadowed testimonies to this illuminated reckoning. Harlan Voss occupied the witness enclosure with the diminished stature of a figure once monolithic, now eroded by circumstance. His trench coat discarded for a borrowed suit that hung loosely on his frame, the fabric ill-suited to his build and rumpled from nights of fitful repose, his wrists bearing the subtle chafe of temporary restraints now removed, but their memory lingering in the way he clasped his hands, the arrest that had followed the diner's pact shattering the illusion of invulnerability like glass under pressure, plea negotiations unraveling in cascades as accomplices bartered truths for leniency. Reyes, the rookie, unfolding precinct lore under immunity's umbrella with the halting precision of one shedding a too tight skin, recounting not just the steps but the systemic whispers of favored routes and overlooked infractions. Lyle, the veteran, trading anecdotes for transcripts in a flurry of midnight meetings with investigators. his gambler's poise cracking to reveal the fear of obsolescence in a landscape shifting toward accountability's horizon. Now Voss stood solitary, the panel's inquiries probing like diagnostic tools, his responses measured but laced with the defensiveness of a man whose worldview had been charted on maps drawn in absolutes. In the morning sequence, no longer a standalone anecdote but a nexus in a web of inquiries that spanned wiretap anomalies and evidence handling lapses. Detective Voss. Elena commenced her direct with the incisive poise of a navigator plotting course through fog-shrouded straits, her voice threading the room like a guiding current. You described the encounter as a routine perimeter assessment. Yet, archival metadata indicates your recording device was disengaged precisely 47 seconds antecedent to contact. Would you attribute this to equipment variance or deliberate discretion? The screen adjacent to the dais bloomed with evidentiary metadata, timestamps arrayed in stark columns that glared with the unforgiving precision of unblinking witnesses, each entry a breadcrumb leading back to intense doorstep, Voss shifting in his seat with the subtle creak of leather underscoring his discomfort, his collar constricting like a vine overtaking familiar ground as he replied, Field conditions, counselor devices falter under duress. Standard troubleshooting post-incident confirmed no malice. The word malice lingered. A pebble dropped into still water, rippling outward as Elena echoed it with gentle amplification, faltering, then intriguing, given that 73% of such interruptions in your logs correlate with engagements involving protected classes, happenstance, or perhaps a pattern warranting calibration. The panel's lead overseer, a woman with wire-framed spectacles and a ledger of audits behind her, leaned forward incrementally, her pen pausing mid-note as the data specialist interjected with clinical detachment. Corroborative modeling yields a p-value below 0.001, indicating non-random deviation statistical anomaly elevated to evidentiary threshold. Voss's jaw tightened, the muscles working silently like gears grinding against unaccustomed friction, his gaze dropping to the table's edge where his fingers traced invisible circuits, a man adrift in the tide of empirics that challenged the sanctity of his seasoned instincts. Elena pivoted seamlessly, summoning a carousel of exhibits with the fluid command of a curator, unveiling treasures from vaulted depths, audio vignettes extracted from patrol dispatches, where Voss's gravel timbre coached novices on discerning the flow. Some paths invite correction, others demand it, the clips playing in looped brevity that stripped away context to reveal the scaffolding of supposition, composite videos montaged from disparate sources, dashcams, hallway feeds, anonymous submissions depicting parallel encounters where holds mirrored the steps choreography but reports diverged into narratives of provocation, victims' entreaties overlaid with annotations of non-compliance that rang hollow under scrutiny. Maria Ramirez ascended to the enclosure next, her ascent marked by the soft click of low heels on tile, her voice emerging steady yet threaded with the authenticity of lived testimony, hands steady on the rail as she recounted. The inquiries came after my statement surfaced. Detective Voss conveyed that informants who overstep lanes face detours, not just delays. It reshaped my choices, but not my resolve. The room seemed to contract around her words, a collective indrawing that amplified their resonance. Voss's head bowing under the beam of implication, the weight of complicity settling like sediment in clear water, his earlier denials fracturing into murmurs as the DOJ representative pursued. And the coordinates in question, did they align with your safe routes or routes rerouted post-contact? Ramirez's affirmation, quiet but unyielding, wove another strand into the evidentiary braid. Cross-examination unfolded as Elena's orchestrated deconstruction, a ballet of inquiry where each step dismantled facade without flourish. You maintain the subject-initiated escalation, detective, yet auxiliary feed from camera 3 documents, extended credentials, and open posture escalation invisibility, perhaps, rather than volatility. Voss's retorts emerged labored, a tapestry of deflections stitched from protocol's lexicon split-second synthesis. Counselor. Training emphasizes containment over colloquy, but Elena pressed onward, unyielding as bedrock, and the affidavits dispersed underfoot sealed under judicial mandate. Dispersal as de-escalation, or dispersal as desregard? The queries landed with the rhythmic precision of waves eroding cliffside, his fortifications yielding inch by inexorable inch. the panel's scribbles multiplying like footnotes to a evolving canon. Recess interlude offered Voss a sequestered huddle with his counsel, a beleaguered advocate in a rumpled Oxford whose tie hung askew like a flag of fatigue. His counsel urgent and laced with pragmatism: concede the overreach, Harlan cap at procedural fault, perhaps concurrent suspension. The mosaics too intricate for full denial. But Voss, ensnared by the remnants of his unassailable self-image, growled a refusal threaded with the defiance of one who had long navigated by internal compass. She's layering shadows over standard ops, the apparatus shields its own. We hold for vindication. Delusion. Elena observed from her vantage across the divide, manifested as the terminal symptom of isolation, a soliloquy whispered to echoes in an emptying theater. Resumption brought the panel's collective scrutiny to bear on Voss's entanglements with the Ramirez periphery, the DOJ lead probing with the exactitude of a surveyor mapping fault lines, archived correspondence from your station timestamps matching informant relocations, sabotage of safeguards, or stewardship gone astray. Voss fractured under the inquiry, his voice splintering like dry timber. Legacy alliances, not orchestration. Old debts repaid in shadows, not spotlights. The concession dangled, a self-forged tether drawing him deeper into the evidentiary snare, the room's hush amplifying the admission's gravity, as if the very walls inscribed it into perpetuity. Elena's summation transcended mere advocacy, evolving into a blueprint for renewal, her posture shifting from lectern to the room's heart, as she addressed not just the panel, but the spectral assembly of stakeholders. Beyond reformers in distant offices, families tracing lineages of loss, and officers weighing badges against burdens, this tableau transcends individual oversight. It resonates as the reverberation of insulated silos, where emblems eclipse empathy and vigilance veers toward variance. She interlaced the personal inflection, the steps' abrupt choreography as emblematic microcosm with institutional imperatives. Revitalization requires rigor, algorithmic audits embedded in daily dispatches, equity curricula calibrated for cultural contours, oversight collectives, vested with inquisitorial latitude tools not as talismans but as transformers, ensuring pathways diverge from presumption toward parity. The panel's affirmations manifested in synchronized notations, the magistrate's murmur of compelling framework motions for implementation cued sealing the conceptual cornerstone. Verdict's vigil arrived beneath twilight's deepening palette, the chamber depopulating to a cadre of essentials as the chief overseer rose, her voice a measured cadence intoning resolution. Findings: affirm culpability across spectrum. Procedural interference under authority, impediment to equitable process, collaborative circumvention of safeguards adjudication, 22 years supervised, divestiture of accruals, perpetual exclusion from civic stewardship. Voss subsided into his chair, frame quaking with the aftershocks of realization, guttural utterances dissolving into quiet unraveling, a silhouette diminished against the screen's fading glow, his trajectory arcing from sentinel to sentinel under stricter gaze. Yet Elena's horizon extended beyond the enclosure's confines, her gaze ascending to the gallery's fringes where advocates and kin nodded in solemn convergence. Ramirez drawing near post-adjournment to clasp her hand with the warmth of forged fraternity. On behalf of those who lingered in limbo, this lightens loads unspoken. The Ramirez continuum reignited in the verdict's wake, Morales' network fragmenting under Elena's reinstated aegis, informants emerging from seclusion with testimonies bolstered by the beacon of precedent, their narratives flowing freer in the cleared channels of trust, temporal folds compressed months into montages of metamorphosis. Voss's cadre disbanded with surgical precision, federal embeds integrating like consultants in collaborative clinics, their mandates embedding monitors that flagged variances before they calcified into crises. Elena lent her voice to municipal conclaves, her scar a subtle sigil as she unrolled schematics for equity recruitment rubrics prioritizing pluralism, simulation suites honing harmony over hierarchy, ocular oversight via augmented feeds with neutral arbiters, each pillar a plank in the platform, elevating service from station to solidarity. Demonstrations, once fractious flares, transmuted into dialogues, civic caucuses where veterans like a redeemed Reyes, his tenure tentative but earnest, proffered unvarnished reflections on recalibration's rigors, his anecdotes bridging chasms with the authenticity of alteration. In tranquil coda, Elena returned to those inaugural steps under a canopy of stars unmarred by urban haze, her briefcase now unburdened by immediacy, the inscription's gleam undimmed and unironized, inhaling the night's renewal crisp with potential's promise. Equity, she discerned, manifested not in monolithic decrees but in meticulous masonry, hewing balance from bedrock one deliberate facet at a time. Voss consigned to contemplative confines where missives to estranged kin went unanswered, a contemplative wraith in reform's rear view. Elena ascended onward, trajectory arcing to the DA's vanguard, steward of epochs where resonances softened to rhythms of reciprocity, the metropolis indented yet invigorated, murmuring her legacy in the cadence of change's chorus. Those steps transformed from site of strife to sanctuary of supposition's surrender, custodians of a covenant reaffirmed. Parity beneath protocol, inexorable and inclusive.